Welcome to the fourth session of Land, Sea and Sky, the Archaeology of Coasts and Islands, a National Monument Service online conference in partnership with the OPW and organised by Archaeology Ireland. This session consists of 3 slightly shorter presentations with the theme Seascapes in Focus. The first presentation, Learning from Loss, Insights from 20 Years of Public Archaeology at the Scottish Coast, is brought to us by Joanna Hambly, a research fellow at the University of St Andrews and project manager at SCAPE, where she is in the happy position of being able to combine archaeology with her passion for involving volunteers and her enjoyment of being on the coast, and Tom Dawson, Principal Research Fellow at the University of St Andrews and manager of SCAPE. Tom has worked in archaeology around the world and since 2000 has drawn on this experience in applying fresh approaches to tackling eroding coastal heritage through public engagement and community action. The SCAPE Trust is a small team of archaeologists at the University of St Andrews that has been working with the public for 20 years, monitoring, documenting and taking practical action at threatened coastal heritage sites across Scotland. This presentation shares findings from 2 recent projects: Scotland's Coastal Heritage at Risk project, running 2012 to 2016, which put community volunteering at the heart of a national survey to update records and prioritise action at eroding archaeological sites. And in 2018, the Learning from Loss programme, which brought over 100 people from local communities together with academics and heritage practitioners from the USA and Scotland to explore attitudes to coastal heritage loss and climate change. These projects have provided a lot of information about the state of Scotland's coastal heritage resource, its potential and how it has been affected by natural processes, as well as about public attitudes to heritage loss.
Hi there, I'm Tom.
I'm Jo.
And we work with SCAPE and the University of St Andrews. We're on the east coast of Fife at the moment, but we work all around the entire coast of Scotland. And today it's a really beautiful sunny day, the sea's quite calm, but of course often the sea is nothing like this. It can be really wild.
Over the next half an hour we're going to talk about what we've learnt about the character of Scotland's coastal heritage, what's at risk, where, and think about some of the factors that cause vulnerability to help us plan for the future.
I'm then going to present a couple of case studies showing some practical action that we've taken with communities at some eroding sites.
So let's start off with a national context. We're going to have a whiz around Scotland, anti-clockwise, starting from Eyemouth in the southeast. And these are just a handful of selected sites, but they'll give you a flavour of the range of archaeology that we have, and also the breadth and the depth of the history and the knowledge that they hold. I hope you like the music. That was just a handful of sites, but I'm sure you've been able to make the connections between these and the heritage you know best in your coastal areas. So now let's talk about our understanding of the resource and how we got there. What we can generally say about coastal heritage at risk in Scotland is that it falls into two broad categories. The first is all that is specifically maritime. It has a connection with the sea. So coastal infrastructure related to fishing, for example, leisure, the leisure industry, defence would come into this category, so everything from Iron Age promontory forts through to Cold War remains. And these are sites that are constructed at the coast edge or go out into the intertidal zone, and social and economic change has meant that they're not used anymore, and so they're not maintained, and they're exposed to the full force of coastal processes, and they deteriorate very quickly. And we found in our surveys of particularly wooden remains in the intertidal zone and at the coast edge, for example, boats, that really they've reached a tipping point, and very soon these won't be visible anymore, and so they'll be lost from local memory. The second category is settlement or activities that are not specific to the coast, but are now in the intertidal zone or right at the coast edge. These are usually prehistoric sites, but we do get early medieval and Norse and Viking sites that are in this category. And they're now on the beach or in the intertidal zone because of their isostatic history. So in Scotland, Shetland, Orkney, the Western Isles and parts of the Highlands, we've had relative sea level rise since deglaciation around 10,000 years ago. And so prehistoric sites that were previously coastal but not right on the coast are now in the wave zone. So once a site is in the wave zone, the most important factors driving their vulnerability are the physical nature of the coast edge, and you can get lots of great up-to-date information from the Dynamic Coast project, and also the wind and wave climate. So west-facing coasts are most vulnerable, although bear in mind that they have been responding to these environments for a very, very long time, so to a certain extent they're adapted to do so. But any archaeological sites at the coast edge are very vulnerable in these areas. And it's the interplay of all these factors that explain why our coastal sites are at risk. So how do we know so much about it in Scotland? Well, it has been a long process. In 1995, then Historic Scotland took the strategic lead by commissioning coastal zone assessment surveys, and the last one of these was completed in 2010. Since then, Tom analysed the data collected by all these surveys, and he applied quite a straightforward formula of site significance and vulnerability based upon the observations of the surveyors to pull out the sites that were most important and most at risk from damage or loss as a result of coastal processes. Now, Tom pulled out around 1,000 sites that he recommended had another visit to update the condition survey and update the recommendations for action. So these were the most at-risk sites coming out of the coastal zone assessment surveys. And between 2012 and 16, SCAPE worked with a volunteer network across Scotland to verify the condition of these sites in the field. So around 500 volunteers were involved in the surveys. They submitted over 1,000 records of sites, and very importantly, they visited nearly 90% of the most at-risk sites that Tom had identified. So we had a very good evidence base upon which to base our revised priorities. The results of this survey was that the total number of priority sites were reduced by about half, but the proportion in each area remained the same. Unsurprisingly, a large proportion of our most vulnerable sites were located on soft coastlines, so sand dune or macha environments. But of significance are nearly a quarter of the sites located on what we call hard coastlines, but a very low altitude. So these, in some parts of Scotland, these are also very vulnerable to coastal processes. And these areas aren't very adequately captured in models of coast edge susceptibility. So the big question we had to answer was, why did we find there were fewer high priority sites? And by the way, by priority sites, I mean only the top slice of very significant sites. Usually they would meet criteria of national significance, and they're vulnerable to complete loss or large-scale damage as a result of coastal erosion. So firstly, around 10% of the sites had either been destroyed since they were first documented, or they'd been excavated and dealt with. Secondly, a national survey done over a short space of time corrected regional discrepancies and surveyor bias. And thirdly, in many of those sandy, low-lying areas, we did find more evidence that these coastal environments were more stable now than they had been when they were originally surveyed in the coastal zone assessment surveys. So one of the things that could account for this is a change in land use and land management practice. So for example, stock levels on the Macha are generally lower now than they would have been 15-20 years ago. We also heard during our surveys, and this is a great advantage of working with local residents as volunteers to carry out the surveys, a lot of anecdotal evidence for much fewer rabbits around. So you can imagine this would have quite a profound impact on the ecology of like sand dune areas if there are fewer rabbits. And this has since been backed up by BTO mammal surveys, which have recorded an 82% decline in the rabbit population of Scotland since 1995. Now, this isn't because of myxomatosis. It's a new viral disease which transferred from pet rabbits to the wild rabbit population, and it's not yet everywhere in Scotland, but it is having a profound effect on some ecosystems. And you might ask yourself, when did you last see a rabbit? In some parts of Scotland, and particularly the Western Isles, the original surveys were carried out after a severe storm, the Western Isles hurricane in 2005, and then 10-12 years later, when we did the surveys again, the coastline had naturally stabilised after this event. So that does account for stabilisation along a lot of the west coast of the Western Isles. But this meteorological event doesn't account for trends of stabilisation everywhere. And so we did a bit of research on general storminess trends over the last century or so. And this diagram is very useful because, as you can see, storminess is very messy data, and you can put trend lines through it, but they must be treated with caution. But it looks like there was elevated storminess at the end of the 19th century, which I think is well documented, and also a period of elevated storminess around 1990-95. Now bear in mind that many of the original coastal zone assessment surveys were carried out between 1995 and 1998, during or just after this period of elevated storminess. But our volunteers carried out their surveys 10 or 15 years after this period of elevated storminess, and they documented relatively more stable conditions in our coastal archaeological sites. That's just a really quick overview of the main results, but you can download the full report from our website. And what can we expect in the future? Well, we know we have empirical evidence that sea level rise is accelerating. A rise in sea level of up to 90 centimetres in the Edinburgh region by the end of the century is perfectly feasible. It looks like we are heading down the high emissions scenario at the moment. So sea level rise in places like Shetland and Orkney will be more extreme. This study has recorded an increase in winter wave height, although the jury's still out whether this is natural variability or climate change. There is a lot of uncertainty around whether the frequency of storms will increase and the intensity of storms will increase in the future. But sea level rise alone will put more sites and a greater proportion of those sites into the wave zone more often. And even if we were to cut our emissions now, we're still looking at the next few decades of increased erosion and increased damage and loss of our coastal heritage sites. So against this rather gloomy forecast, I was asked a great question recently in the Western Isles when I was giving a talk that was covering some of these same issues. And the question was, are there any benefits of climate change to coastal heritage? And this threw me a bit because while I was answering the question from the heritage point of view, saying, well, not really, because damage will only accelerate, there was a voice in my head reminding me that at SCAPE we've never seen erosion just as a problem. We see it also as an opportunity to involve people in learning interesting things about heritage and collectively in gaining new knowledge about Scotland's past. And at SCAPE we do this all the time. We do this through our community surveys, we do this through community projects at eroding sites.
Collecting information from sites does nothing to preserve them, and action needs to be taken now. We need to work in partnerships, and working with communities is a great way of ensuring that something is saved at sites that are valued locally. Over the past 20 years at SCAPE, this is exactly what we've been doing, and we've run a whole series of different projects running from collecting oral histories to making interactive 3D models. We've made films, we've done excavations, geophysical surveys, and we're going to give you a flavour of a couple of our projects right now. The first takes us to the island of Sandy in Orkney, where we work with the local community at a site that was revealed in a storm back in 2005.
Storms can be terrifying in the winter. Sometimes you go to bed at night really hoping you're still going to be there in the morning. They can destroy houses, they can remove tens of metres of coastline overnight. They're incredibly powerful.
There have been some quite bad storms. A lot of the east side of the islands getting eroded or disappearing, and gradually eating into the island. It's getting smaller, I think.
In 2005, a particularly bad storm hit the island of Sandy.
It was pretty bad. The wall was undermined behind me there, and the wife came out and had a look and saw it was undermined. She came in to tell me, so I came out and had a look then, and I came further along the beach and I discovered all the stones sticking up out of the beach, and I went in and told her. She never told me about the archaeology, so she came out and had a look then, and we thought it was maybe a burial to start with. We found this tank, it looked like it had a lid on it, so I thought it was a burial, and that got them in action.
Although burnt mounds are common throughout Europe, the Muir site is one of a small number that have been excavated that contain structures. In just 3 days, the emergency excavation following the storm revealed compartments made of orthostats, a passageway leading to a sunken stone-lined tank, and a cistern or well with a drain.
When I spotted the advert for the short project starting, and I thought, that's made for here, we've got to do something. So we had a series of meetings and decided what we would like to do is have a project where the end result would be of long-term benefit for the island. So we wouldn't have just an excavation, everything being backfilled and the finds going away from the island, which is what normally happens, but we would have something lasting to show for it.
So this is the well or the cistern, and this was first discovered during the original excavation in 2005, but at that time it was filled right up to the top here, and they excavated down to the level that I'm standing at here. We found in total 6 steps, and I'm just walking down them now. And then below the last step there's a little ledge, and I'm now standing at the bottom of the well. We're now going down into the well. So the material you can see there is bedrock, and they've made a large hole, built walls up on the sides, but they've just left the back as bedrock and then placed that lintel spanning the 2 side walls. And there is a gap, which I can put my hand up, between the bedrock and the wall. And presumably what happens is the water would run down the bedrock here and then fill up this chamber. So, there we have it, a Bronze Age well.
No one knows what burnt mounds were used for, but theories range from tanning hides to brewing, bathing or cooking. The aim of the Shore Dig project was to re-excavate the structures so that they could be rebuilt further inland.
We are moving a burnt mound that's in danger of being eroded by the sea from its original site in Moor up to here at the Heritage Centre. It's a very good thing to have the burnt mound here because it ties in the Heritage Centre, the burnt mound and the croft that we renovated a few years ago, so it gives us a nice little place for tourists.
We've been moving them with a digger and a cargo net and a tractor and trailer and volunteers from the local community. The position of every stone is recorded in great detail at the original site, and the positions are then transferred onto the site of the relocation so it can be as accurate as possible.
I think it is a super way of sort of fixing the past in people's minds.
To actually see it in person, you can like get in and around and see what it might have been like. I think it's a really brilliant way of doing it.
When folk come to a museum, they want to see a reconstruction, because I think folk really like to see what it might have looked like and just kind of help them to picture what people were living like.
You know, that's brilliant that you can just go in and you don't have someone telling you not to touch anything. And especially if you've got little kids, then they love playing around it. And I think that's really good. That's really all that I think the general public are concerned about with archaeology, is they'd like to touch it.
Removing the enormous base of the tank for relocation at the Heritage Centre, the team were surprised to find that it covered an earlier structure. As the dig was nearing completion, the team decided to return the following year to investigate the mysterious sunken feature.
So it's our first day on site. We're back with the Sandy Archaeology Group, and they're doing a fantastic job.
The weather took a turn for the worse.
The wind is so strong that irritatingly it has actually knocked the camera over and knocked the microphone off, so we've broken our camera, but there we go. The wind is up again and the sea is coming up, and really for the last 2 weeks we have been up against it with the weather. It's either been very rainy or it's been very windy. We've been pumping out the well, and that's helping to take water away from the site, and it means that we have a chance of investigating the mysterious feature in the centre of our site. It certainly is looking as though it may have been collecting water at some point. We have this organic material which we're sampling, but we actually have plant remains which are visible to the naked eye, and you can maybe see some of these just here. Theory at the moment is this is a Neolithic cistern, and over there we have our Bronze Age water tank. And don't forget, up in Chanowick we found an Iron Age well as well. So in fact we have the prehistoric water collection hat trick. Thank you very much, ma'am.
The excavation revealed a wealth of unexpected material, and specialists continue to analyse it. However, the legacy of the project is the contribution of the numerous people who volunteered their time.
We've had an incredible interest from the local community. We've had any number of people volunteering, wanting to help out in all sorts of different ways.
I think it's really good for the community to get involved, and we do have a good community in Sandy.
Community archaeology is an excellent idea. More and more folk in Orkney are interested in archaeology, especially when somebody that's a complete novice like me can go and find something, and that's really what everybody's wanting, isn't it? Go and find something like that.
And who likes archaeology?
Me!
we now head up to Shetland to show you what can be learned from cleaning up an eroding section. And what's great about this one is this was a site that wasn't even known about before it was uncovered during a storm.
Just beside me, a skeleton was revealed by erosion in December of 2012. And the head of the skeleton was just here, and their feet were sticking into the section over there. At first it was assumed that the burial was probably associated with what was being revealed in the section. And a sample was sent off to for radiocarbon dating, and the date came back as early 19th century. So the more likely explanation for the burial is that they were a body washed up on the shore. Behind me, you can see these great big granite blocks placed upon the sand, and that is the foundation of the Broch wall. The outside face of this wall to the inside face of this wall, it's 5 meters, so that's a 5 meter wide wall. Imagine Iron Age castles. So castles in the Iron Age would have great big thick defensive walls, and that's probably what we're looking at here, an Iron Age castle, or as we call them, brochs. So here the sea again has done our work for us, and then it's revealed underneath the foundations of the Broch this incredible well, which as far as we can tell from what was infilling it, hasn't been disturbed until 2012. As is common with many brochs, they changed from being castle-y defensive structures into domestic structures. And behind me here, you can see very clear evidence of that. You've got the inside face of the Broch wall, and against it has been built this dry stone wall, which is one of what we call piers of a wheelhouse. So now I'm on the other side of the Broch, and we can see one of the other piers that would have been related to the wheelhouse. So behind me, we should be seeing the Broch wall, but it's not there. We see brochs as like amazing, fascinating, tantalizing glimpses of the past, but previous generations would have seen them as great quarries.
So obviously they dismantled the Broch to build their houses. But that left a deep layer of infill that's filled up over the years, because we've also found a couple of bits of Hanseatic pottery that shows that there were activity here at that period, and that the locals here were obviously trading with the German merchants that were here. So probably the people who built their houses from the Broch in the medieval period were fishing and trading fish and knitting and things like that in exchange for German pottery.
So what we're doing today on the site is we're doing a special sort of scientific dating called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL for short. You don't need to remember that. It's a technique that dates quartz grains to when they were last exposed to light. So working on the assumption that the last time the sand underlying the Broch was exposed to light was when the Broch was constructed, we can get a date of the date of construction of the Broch by dating the quartz grains underneath it.
Archaeology Shetland's a brand new community group. We set it up in February this year with the idea of liaising between kind of the public and the professionals and getting everyone involved in archaeology and helping promote and conserve Shetland's archaeology through sort of actions of the community. The site has taken us slightly by surprise. There's more here than we expected. The volunteers have all had a really, really good time this week. Great introduction to archaeology and a brilliant first season for Archaeology Shetland.
I learned a lot, yeah. It's been great working with archaeologists and seeing exactly how a dig works. When I was little, this was my dream job, to be an archaeologist.
All this just goes to show how much the coast has changed, even really in the last 20 years, how much it's been eroded away and how we need to document these things and check them out before they're lost completely.
Oh, it's been brilliant. Yeah, it's really nice to have this opportunity to be excavating. Because I usually deal with the finds in my line of work, so it's actually really great to do at this end, and when they're actually coming out the earth and the sand to see how the process works. It's been brilliant.
It's fascinating. It's really, really been a privilege to work on it, and it's very interesting to see just what's evolved from just the day we've had so far.
It's been an absolutely fantastic site to work on. We've had some really, really interesting stuff coming out, some fantastic features like the well and the hearth, and also it's been really good to get together with a bunch of like-minded people and have some good fun looking at some really interesting archaeology.
I've never done anything like this ever before. I've always wanted to, but there isn't the opportunity to get involved in anything, so when I saw this on Facebook, I jumped at the chance, and it's been fabulous. I think it's been one of the best things I've ever done, apart from drawing.
It's a fabulous piece of archaeology that's just emerging from the cliff, and to take part in this with SCAPE has been a fantastic experience.
It's been an absolute blast being here. Everybody's nice, of course, and the weather has been so far just absolutely perfect for this kind of thing.
My favourite thing has been finding the finds. My favourite find was the fishing hook. It is better than going on holiday.
So, thank you for joining us on this tour of Scotland's eroding heritage. We hope it's given you some food for thought. If you'd like to learn more about our work, visit our website at www.scapetrust.org, and we look forward to hearing about your coastal discoveries.
In our penultimate presentation on the penultimate session of Land, Sea and Sky, the Archaeology of Coasts and Islands, we hear from Tracy Collins, a professional archaeologist and director of heritage consultancy Aegis Archaeology since its establishment in 1997. As an archaeologist working in the contract sector, she has worked on cultural heritage of all periods, but has a special research interest in medieval monastic archaeology. Tracy's presentation over 9 Waves Seascape Character Assessment in Ireland introduces a Seascape Character Assessment project undertaken by the environmental consultancy Minogue and Associates and commissioned by the Marine Institute, Ferris Namara, the state agency responsible for marine research, technology development and innovation in Ireland. Tracy Collins was the archaeologist on a project team which included environmentalists, ecologists, landscape architects, geologists and GIS specialists. Her presentation outlines the aims of the project and details the cultural heritage aspects, giving an overview of the broad and rich variety of cultural heritage found on the Irish coast and islands, from earliest to more recent times. She will also discuss some lessons learned during the project and ideas how cultural heritage might be enhanced and protected into the future.
The sea has been a constant influence in Irish history and culture. The legend of the Milesians' arrival in Ireland, thought to be on the Iveragh Peninsula, County Kerry, tells of Amragan of the Milesians being requested to stay a magical distance of 9 waves from the land by the native Tuatha De Danann. In the present, the process of seascape character assessment is a core component for policy formation and marine spatial planning. Seascape character assessment is a method for assessing, characterising, mapping and describing seascape character and is already well established and widely used in other jurisdictions. This assessment was commissioned by the Marine Institute to fill an identified gap in Ireland and contributes to achieving commitments under the European Landscape Convention and Ireland's national landscape strategy. The interdisciplinary team for Ireland's Seascape assessment was formed and led by Ruth Minogue of Minogue Associates, comprising Deirdre Black, myself Tracy Collins, Pat Doherty, Dr. Karen Foley, Dr. Ronan Hennessy and Eilish Vaughan. Seascape may be defined as an area of sea, coastline and land as perceived by people whose character results from the actions and interactions of land with sea by natural and/or human factors. The primary aim of this project was to identify, classify and describe seascape character at a regional scale for the Republic of Ireland. Two objectives were set out. First, to understand different seascape character types along the coast, and second, to develop character assessments which described key features and character of each seascape area. The character of an area may be defined as its distinctive nature, or what makes it special. Seascape character type is a dynamic and changing space. As it is perceived by people, there are multiple interpretations and understandings. Furthermore, seascape character can be described at different scales with local variations and nuances. This project brief specified a regional scale, which may be defined as recognisable geographical areas with a consistent overall character at a strategic level. Prior to areas being defined, a number of distinct character types were identified. They are generic in nature in that they may occur in different locations, but wherever they occur, they are broadly similar, with similar combinations of geology, bathymetry, ecology, human influences, and perceptual and aesthetic attributes. For example, sheltered bays, rocky coves, and sandy beaches are recognisable and distinct seascape character types. These types provide a good basis for analysing seascape change, as many influences and pressures affecting seascapes with similar character in similar ways. So following the formulation of 13 character types, 15 regional seascape character areas with 2 border local scale areas were identified. Seascape character areas are unique units which are discrete geographical areas comprising one or more component seascape character types. Each area has its own identity and provides a good framework within which to draw out patterns of local distinctiveness and those factors influencing a sense of place. They can be used to develop more tailored policies and strategies reflecting the things that make a seascape different, distinctive and special. The process of forming and describing the 15 seascape character areas was a very reflexive process between all of the disciplines involved, and the boundaries of some of the areas changed over the course of the research and fieldwork. Following a literature review, Ireland's Seascape Character Assessment Zone for Cultural Heritage was set at the 12 nautical mile territorial limit on the seaward side, which is approximately 22 kilometres from the coast, and encompassed a 1 kilometre strip of coastline. It is important to note that these boundaries were arbitrary and wrecks are known well beyond this seaward point. On the landward side, the 1 kilometre strip was preferred to the high water mark limit of other studies, as it did not take account of a lot of the coastal cultural heritage which the project team felt was important to include. The cultural heritage component, which I outline presently, lent itself well to a GIS approach for the project. In addition to fieldwork, publicly available information was used: historic mapping, the Sites and Monuments Record, the Wreck Inventory of Ireland database, archaeological excavations, the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, a variety of heritage maps, and the local authority data sets and other websites. What was immediately striking from our study was the sheer quantity of cultural heritage features around our coast. And when each seascape character area was focused on, the quality of that cultural heritage became very apparent. And even though the cultural heritage component did not define a seascape character in itself, its influence was strongly felt in placemaking and differentiation between areas. The cultural heritage, archaeological, architectural and historical, represents human activity on the island since prehistoric times. The sea and coast of Ireland has been known to seafarers from the earliest times. For example, Pliny the Elder described Ireland in about 77 AD, and later Tacitus. Early maps, such as that drawn by the Greek geographer Strabo and later Ptolemy, provided accounts of the coast of Ireland thought to have been created from information gathered from seafarers who travelled to Ireland from the Mediterranean region. In Irish myth, the dead went to Chalk Down, thought to be an island of the southwest coast now identified as Bull Rock off Dursey Island, County Cork. The motif of the sea voyage, or Imram, is very common in Irish myth and literature, particularly into the early medieval period. And the sea continued to feature prominently in the saints' lives and stories, most famously in St. Brendan's voyage, the Navigatio. These later tales use the sea as a metaphor for religious quest. Then the sea and coastline have been used and recorded since earliest times and shows a continuous use of the coastline and the sea's resources until the present day. And what is remarkable is that what remains today is just a fraction of what once existed in the coastal and sea region of Ireland, and it is likely that much more awaits discovery. The shoreline and sea have been used by people in the past as a food source, for raw materials, a source of livelihood, for travel and communication, and as places of settlement and possibly ritual. While the sea is often thought of as a barrier or frontier, in the past it provided the only route to the wider world and was considered a strong connecting force. But working and living in a sea and coastal environment was and is challenging and even dangerous. As Breen and O'Sullivan warn, it is important to be conscious of this, lest, and I quote, we over-romanticise coastal life in the past. Evidence of human settlement activity in Ireland begins in the Mesolithic, approximately 10,000 years ago. It is possible that earlier occupation lies awaiting discovery, either as submerged landscapes underwater along the south coast or in the raised beaches of the northern coast. It was previously thought that humans first entered the island of Ireland from across the sea along the northern coast, as the earliest dated occupation currently known is at Mount Sandal, County Derry, adjacent to the River Bann and about 5 kilometres from the sea. And while this remains the earliest settlement site of the period, it is quite likely that there are other sites around the coast and inland along rivers that suggest that the early peoples may have used several routes of access. These nomadic Mesolithic people would have used the seashore in various ways for food with seabirds, fish, shellfish and probably seaweeds, and have left evidence in the form of rubbish middens consisting largely of shells. Fish traps are known from this period, the earliest 5 examples being found at the North Wall Quay or Spencer Dock on the River Liffey, which in the Mesolithic period would have been the silty foreshore of the river's tidal estuary. And coastal sites dating to this period include Belderg, County Mayo, Ferreters Cove, County Kerry, and Sutton, County Dublin. Furthermore, the presence of human bone in some of these shell middens dating to the Mesolithic have led to suggestions that the sea was important in death ritual and may be a similar response to the Mesolithic coastal cemeteries of mainland Europe. The Neolithic period is considered to have been revolutionary, as for the first time there is evidence of the emergence of farming societies. There was a profound change as people moved from a nomadic lifestyle to one organised around animal husbandry and cereal cultivation. The sea facilitated the movement of ideas and people. An example of a Neolithic coastal habitation in a field system has been excavated at Caja, which by approximately 3500 BC incorporated megalithic tombs. Tools in the Neolithic continue to be produced in stone, and a number of stone quarries have been identified for the production of high-quality stone axes, such as porphyry at the quarry on Lambay Island, County Dublin. Middens continue to be created and used. Large prehistoric shell middens on the sand dunes at Cullinamore are lightly associated with Neolithic seascape and landscapes around Maeve's Cairn and Knocknarea and the Cool Era Peninsula in Sligo. With the advent of the Neolithic period, the emergence of the megalithic tomb occurs. There are 4 distinct types, which are generally chronological from earliest to latest: court, portal, passage and wedge. These monuments marked a shift to communal burial, though perhaps only for the elite of Neolithic society. This megalithic culture package, including megalithic art, is considered part of a wider one found along the Atlantic coastline of Europe. And again, one of the important research questions is the precise method and route of transmission of these ideas across the sea. Seascapes were likely of significance when locations of megalithic tombs were chosen, such as the passage tombs at Braymore, County Dublin, and the wedge tomb at Alter, situated by the sea near Schull in West Cork. The Bronze Age marked further change within society in regard to material culture and social practice, as well as the nature of construction of houses and the use of sites and monuments. Coastal excavated settlement dating to this period includes, for example, Carrigillihy, County Cork in Glandore Harbour, Ahinish Island, County Limerick, and the Shannon Estuary. Stone monuments dating to the Bronze Age, standing stones, stone pairs, rows and circles, are particularly numerous in Ireland, and as a result many are located in coastal locations, such as this one at Ardgroom in County Cork. There is increasing evidence for Iron Age settlement and activity in recent years as a result of development-led excavation, as well as projects such as that undertaken by the Discovery Programme. Coastal promontory forts, of which there are 508 known. These are large defensive structures with earthworks, once thought to be characteristic of the Iron Age, through excavations are now known to be multi-period, dating from the Bronze Age and Iron Ages, and some were used into the early medieval period. Perhaps the most impressive and well known of these is Dúnaingus in County Galway, on the Aran Islands, excavated by Claire Cotter of the Discovery Programme. It was found to have been first used in the Middle Bronze Age, and environmental evidence showed that the full range of sea resources from different fish types to seaweed were exploited there. The coastal promontory fort at Dromanna, County Dublin, currently being investigated by Christine Baker, has intriguing archaeological evidence that suggests trade with the Roman world. Habitation sites in the early medieval period include crannogs, cashels and ringforts. These enclosures functioned as farmsteads of wealthier extended families, and due to their ubiquity many are coastal, such as this example at Caherdaniel in County Kerry. There is also some evidence for unenclosed settlements, which are more difficult to identify in the archaeological record, such as on the island of Innisgay North, County Mayo, excavated by Henry, where quantities of dog whelk were found, likely used for dye production rather than food, as they are toxic to eat. The sea figured in this period as a routeway to Britain, Europe and Scandinavia, and also as a motif in literature and poetry. The rules of use of resources provided by the sea, including flotsam and jetsam brought in on the tides, driftwood, fishing and seaweed, were set out in the early Irish law tracts, as belonging to the landowner, suggesting that these items were regularly exploited. No doubt there were also rules for the use of fish traps, which are noted in the archaeological evidence in estuaries and lochs around the coast. Tidal mills were in use for grinding corn, the most well known at Nendrum, County Down. Mediterranean pottery and other exotic materials found in excavations and offshore and trawler nets is archaeological evidence of a wide trading network which was well established by the early medieval period. This period is characterised by the conversion to Christianity, traditionally thought to have been brought to Ireland via the Irish Sea by St. Patrick in the 430s. By the 6th and 7th centuries, larger monasteries or ecclesiastical complexes were established, many on islands along the coast. The most famous is Skellig Michael, County Kerry, one of the 2 World Heritage Sites in Ireland. Religious women and men who lived at these locations must have had various perceptions of the sea, but particularly those along the Atlantic seaboard, which was thought at the time to be the edge of the known world. And the Vikings, renowned seagoers and boat builders, used the sea as their preferred method of travel and transport. Their first raids in Ireland are recorded in 795 and continued until about 830. After this date they settled in Ireland, and by 914 were founding mainly coastal towns to facilitate trade, such as at Cork, Limerick, Wicklow and Arklow, which continue as towns today. Furthermore, the Vikings left a legacy of loanwords which are still in use in the Irish language, many of which relate to fish, fishing, boating, and place names along the coast such as Haven. The later medieval period in Ireland was marked by Anglo-Norman involvement, which began in earnest in 1169, when Richard de Clare and his followers landed at Bannow Bay in Wexford to support the Irish king MacMurrough. By the end of the 12th century, the Normans had succeeded in conquering much, but certainly not all of the country. Ireland continued to be part of the sea trade routes established in the earlier periods, and fishing and the use of boats was a major industry in later medieval Ireland, but one which is often overlooked. And Professor Hollam's ERC-funded project Norfish is currently investigating the medieval and post-medieval North Atlantic fishing trade. Earthen and stone castles of the Anglo-Normans and Gaelic communities were erected on or near the coast for both defence and the exploitation of marine resources. This later tower house at Ferry Carrig is close to an earlier ringwork castle at the confluence of the River Slaney and Wexford Harbour. Most of the Anglo-Norse port towns that the Anglo-Normans took control of or established themselves had a stone castle, for example Limerick Castle at the head of the Shannon estuary. Smaller port towns had stone castles and may also have been walled, for example Dingle, County Kerry, Dungarvan, County Waterford or Dalkey, County Dublin. These towns functioned as harbours and ports, and there is archaeological evidence for trade with Britain and the continent. By 1275 a custom system had already been introduced to Ireland, labelled the Great Custom. Navigational structures are known from this period, for example the lighthouse at Hook Head, thought to have been first tended by monks, or Maiden's Tower near Drogheda, County Meath, for vessels entering the River Boyne. In Gaelic areas, particularly along the west coast in counties Donegal, Mayo, Galway, South Kerry and West Cork, no large port infrastructure has yet been recorded, but rather smaller landing places, piers and harbours were used, frequently associated with tower houses of the 15th century. A number of tower houses along the Mayo coast are associated with the O'Malley family, with their most famous member, Gráinne Whale, reputed to have been a pirate. Their tower houses at Rockfleet, Clare Island and around Clew Bay controlled harbours and natural anchorages. And some of these tower houses were constructed to allow boats to moor alongside. The transition from medieval to the post-medieval and early modern periods in Ireland is best explained as processes of change to what has been termed modernity. In Ireland, there are many examples of where the sea played a pivotal role in this transition. One of the most important events was the Spanish Armada of 1588, a large fleet intended to sail from Spain first to Flanders and then to an invasion of England. So in May 1588, a 130-strong fleet left Lisbon for Flanders, but the expedition failed due to lack of preparation, superior English tactics and poor weather. After 6 days of battle, the Spanish left for home, choosing to sail a much longer route around Scotland and the west coast of Ireland rather than risk being attacked in the English Channel. This was disastrous, and at least 30 Spanish ships were lost, 26 of those along the Irish coast. A number of these have been located and archaeologically investigated, for example the 3 Armada wrecks off County Sligo. Following the failure of the Armada to invade England, further tensions grew, culminating in the 9 Years' War of 1594. After protracted conflict, the English were successful, forcing Irish lords to flee to Spain in 1607 from Rathmullen in County Donegal, known as the Flight of the Earls. The Confederate Wars and the Cromwellian confiscation of land from about 1641 to 1660 subsequently led to the loss of power of the Gaelic lords, particularly along the western and northern seaboard. Archaeologically, this is seen in the record through the refurbishment of existing forts and the construction of new ones, including castles and fortified houses, star-shaped forts and citadels throughout the country. Some of the country's most impressive are James and Charles Fort at the mouth of Kinsale Harbour, shown here, constructed in 1602 and 1677 respectively. Duncannon Fort in Waterford Harbour was strengthened in 1641 to 1660 to also provide protection of the coastline. And other smaller examples are known, such as that at Inishboffin Island and Mutton Island in County Galway. The forts located in Bantry Bay at Dunboy and Newtown in County Cork were constructed in response to the Anglo-Dutch War of 1651 and 52 to protect the shipping routes into Bantry Bay and its safe anchorage. The French were perceived as the main threat to Britain in the 18th century, which was an impetus for fortifications and defensive features to be constructed around the coast. In 1796, Wolfe Tone went to France to campaign for a French invasion of Ireland, and in December, 48 ships and 13,000 troops left France for Bantry Bay. Due to poor planning and bad weather, the ships never landed, and several were wrecked along the Irish coast. One of these ships, a Surveillante, arrived in Bantry Bay but was so badly damaged it was scuttled, and its remains lie off the shore of Whiddy Island, and another was wrecked near Mizen Head in County Cork. Despite this failure of the venture, 3 more ships left France for Ireland in 1798 with 1,000 soldiers and landed at Killala in County Mayo. And as a result of these 1790s incursions, yet more fortifications were constructed. In the 1800s, a circuit of defences were created around the coast, including signal towers, forts, batteries, martello towers, bridgeheads and barracks of various types. And these have all been mapped in detail by Kerrigan. Between 1858 and 1867, the Coast Guard had about 200 stations, and many of these are still standing, and many were associated with lighthouses. Lighthouses guide shipping and serve as a reference point for mariners, with the zenith of lighthouse construction coming in the 19th century, and several of these continue in use today. Hook Lighthouse, seen here, is Ireland's oldest, and the oldest still in use in Britain or Ireland. Along with lighthouses, buoys, lights, navigational pointers were all used to aid safe passage into harbours, such as Dingle, County Kerry, or the Metal Men of Sligo and Waterford, shown here. Since prehistory, boats, ships and shipbuilding have been important, but somewhat elusive in the archaeological record. Smaller boats, such as dugout canoes, occasionally appear. And some traditional boats are in use right up to the present day and have been detailed by Crustor McCarthy, the Curragh or Navo probably being the best known vernacular example. These were multifunctional craft used for passengers, goods, fishing and seaweed gathering. Other well-known native boats include the Hooker, very popular around Galway, and its fishing settlement of the Claddagh, which had over 100 vessels recorded in 1836. Infrastructure was constructed to facilitate the use of all types of water-going craft, such as improved port facilities, as hundreds of smaller quays and piers, many of which were the work of Alexander Nimmo, an engineer extraordinaire. Larger boat and shipbuilding emerged in Ireland, such as at Belfast and Cork, after the more peaceful 18th century and the technological advances of the Industrial Revolution in shipbuilding. Globalisation was but one of the effects of the Industrial Revolution, and this created a huge increase in the numbers of vessels coming to Ireland, and consequently an increase in the number of shipwrecks over time. Interestingly, Dr. Connie Kelleher notes that several vessels were also lost to piracy throughout the post-medieval period. The numbers of wrecks known around the coast of Ireland must be considered an absolute minimum number, as many smaller vessels were lost, but were unrecorded, and many were lost beyond the 22-kilometre seawood limit of this study. In addition to the international sea trade, smaller coastal and island communities continued with their livelihoods associated with the sea and fishing. Island communities, such as that recorded on the Blasket Islands, depended largely on fishing with boats that were family-owned, and the fishermen operated within a loose cooperative environment. Communities on the Aran Islands and the Iniscays were similar. Ireland's islands have a distinctive way of life, and several cultural studies have been completed on islands and islanders, both by the visitors and islanders themselves. More commercial fishing was undertaken at larger settlements such as Dingle, County Kerry, Rutland Island, County Donegal, the Claddagh adjacent to the city of Galway, and Arklow, County Wicklow. At the Claddagh and Arklow, almost the entire village population was involved in the fishing trade, either on boats, making or mending nets, or selling fish at market. Larger scale commercial whaling took place in Ireland until the 1930s, and a station was first established at Inver in County Donegal in the 1760s, and later two more were founded in 1908 on the Inishkay Islands and at Blackside Bay. Shark fishing, mostly for basking shark, was undertaken by local communities, but also on a more organised basis from Donegal, Achill and the Claddagh. Fish palaces were coastal built curing stations for processing, smoking, pickling and pressing of fish such as herring and pilchard, of which there are 20 recorded examples concentrated in the southwest counties of Kerry and Cork. Nor can we forget the Great Famine of the 19th century, when thousands of islanders and mainlanders fled starvation and death by boat, many of which infamously gained the name coffin ships, as this famine memorial at Murrisk so graphically illustrates. Shellfish continued to be exploited in this period. By the 19th century, the demand in oyster consumption was such that legislation was introduced to protect natural oyster beds. And by the 1840s, oyster cultivation was recognised as an industry, with mussel beds operating by the 1880s as early forms of aquaculture. Seaweed and kelp was lightly exploited as fodder, fertiliser and some varieties for food since earliest times, but it became a major industry in the 18th and 19th centuries and was used in industries such as glass, soap, washing soda for linen finishing, and in the production of iodine, which continued until the 1950s. And while Ireland's climate was not entirely suitable for the large-scale commercial salt panning operations, commercial salt pans were established at Ballycastle in County Antrim and Slade, County Wexford. During World War I, Cork Harbour, Bearhaven and Lough Swilly became very important as US Navy made use of the anchorages and facilities provided for naval air stations and seaplane bases. Probably the most famous shipwreck off the Irish coast, the Lusitania, dates to this period, a passenger liner sunk by a submarine off the south coast on the 7th of May 1915. These three defended harbours again became important in 1921 when the British retained them along with Belfast Lough Harbour as treaty ports. The ports and facilities remained available to the Royal Navy with fortifications under British control until the Anglo-Irish Agreement of 1938, when 3 of the 4 were handed back to the Irish state. Concrete structures called lookout posts were used by the Coast Watching Service of the Irish Defence Forces from 1939 until 1945, and these were used for monitoring activity around the Irish coastline. Most had their own ARA sign, although many are now no longer visible and have been described as the GPS of the past. Recently there has been increasing interest in these cultural heritage features, and several have been restored by local community groups. The ARA sign at Bray Head, shown here, was rediscovered in 2018 when a gorse fire revealed its outline. There are a number of known wrecks of ships, planes and submarines in Irish waters associated with World War II. Seaside resorts, sea bathing, spa towns along with leisure travel and modern tourism sprang up as an indirect effect of the Industrial Revolution in Britain and later Ireland, and by the mid to late 19th century many were accessible to day trippers from towns and cities through the extensive rail network. Earlier records exist of drinking seawater as a medicinal practice noticed in the north coast of Dublin as early as 1709 and the Clare coast in the 1740s. Most Irish seaside resorts, perhaps excepting Bray, developed somewhat organically and did not reflect the British trends in seaside resort layout or architecture. Interestingly, seaweed baths appear to be a relatively unique feature of the Irish seascape, with over 300 baths around the coast in the early 20th century. This Seascapes Character Assessment for Ireland was commissioned by the Marine Institute and led by Ruth Minogue and Associates. It hopes to assist in cherishing and enhancing all aspects of Ireland's seascape and help protect it from future forces of change, both natural and humanly created. The study has shown the richness and vibrancy of Ireland's seascapes, but perhaps most especially its very rich and diverse cultural heritage, which has been briefly outlined here. And thank you for listening.
In this, the third and final presentation in our fourth session of Land, Sea and Sky, the Archaeology of Coasts and Islands, we hear from Oliver Hutchinson, who leads the Mersea Island Discovery Programme, a community foreshore archaeology project based in Essex, England, that began in 2016. It is one of 6 such programmes within the Coastal and Intertidal Zone Archaeological Network, CITESAN, of England, which aims to train volunteers within coastal communities to record and monitor archaeology threatened by coastal erosion. Oliver is also a presenter on Channel 4's Britain at Low Tide and an honorary research assistant at the Institute of Archaeology, UCL. In The Tides That Bind, Foreshore Archaeology and the Community of Mersea Island, Essex, Oliver will describe how CITESAN has worked with the residents of Mersea Island to record and monitor archaeological sites and features at risk from coastal erosion. Starting as a handful of locals keen to learn more about their island history, this grew into a network of budding foreshore archaeologists from all corners of the community. The team now comprises over 50 island residents, including oystermen, dog walkers, and the occasional holidaymaker. So far, they have discovered 14 new sites and over 70 new features. This valuable work has revealed the extent of coastal change on Mersea over the last 40,000 years and preserved by record many significant sites and features that have since been lost to the sea. This is the story of how this island community's work to study the past is helping them to understand the challenges they themselves will face in the very near future.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in and joining me. It's a shame we can't all be in the same room doing this, but that's the way it is. So I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Oliver Hutchinson, and I'm an archaeologist from a project called CITESAN, which operates in England. To put my talk in context of the conference, I think I'm really here to offer you a case study of how coastal communities can interact, can learn from, and can actually conduct really quite significant archaeological surveys of their local foreshores and their local coastlines to really develop our understanding of coastal archaeology in England. There are 3 kind of main points that I really want to I think that underlie the talk that I want to get across. And the first is that there are many excellent citizen scientists in coastal communities. Coastal communities are full of people from all different walks of life, and there are lots of skills that can be capitalised and nurtured that really support the work that we've been doing. The second key sort of theme is that there are many ways for communities to contribute to coastal archaeology projects, not just on the ground, but in terms of research and other skills and other ideas. And that measuring loss and change can actually have a powerful effect on the identity of the communities that we've been working with. So there are really 3 themes that I just want to have in your mind as we go through my slides. The first thing I wanted to do is introduce our project. What is CITESAN? Well, it stands for the Coastal and Intertidal Zone Archaeological Network. And at its heart, really, it's a community project to preserve by record England's coastal archaeology. And when we say that, it basically means that we're a non-invasive project. We don't do any excavation unless it's really necessary. What we're doing is recording the remains, the features and the sites that we see as we walk across the foreshore. And there are a couple of reasons why the project was set up. Initially, it was a response to our changing climate. So the impact of major storm events that began to increase or are increasing around the coast of England and the UK, and the threat that they're having to much of our coastal heritage. A lot of the key, flashpoint areas where there is a lot of damage, a lot of erosion takes place from storm surges are actually quite archaeologically rich around the coast of England. So it's really a response to trying to manage that threat. The second one is to understand more about sea level change around England and the UK in prehistory to the present. So trying to use archaeology as a proxy to understand where, perhaps in Bronze Age, the Roman Age, in the medieval period, sea levels were, and trying to map those historic coastlines. So that's, in a nutshell, the project. The problem, as I said, that we're facing is this changing climate. It's more intense weather activities that we're having to deal with. And this pretty incredible picture was taken by one of our volunteers on Mersey Island in Essex, which is the case study I'll be talking to you about. But it sort of hammers home the point. This was not really a scene that they've seen that much in their lifetime. They've lived there for over 50 years. And in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, they've seen much higher tides and much stormier weather coming through. And it's created problems like this. That's their garden wall, which backs onto the Pyfleet Channel, which surrounds the island that they live in. But it's starting to quite regularly surge this way and really come up over the coast path. And that poor little wall is taken quite a battering. But that's the challenge that they face, and that's the type of weather event that they're having. And what impact is that having on the archaeology in the area? Well, this slide is a great comparison one. It's from 2000 on the left-hand side of there, and of course 2015 on the right. It's another part of this island in Essex, Mersey Island, and it shows you the rate that the coastline has receded in that 15-year period. The black and the red lines on the right-hand side, the red line indicates where the coast is or was in 2015, and you can see that in places that's retreated up to 50 metres. And we're not talking about just sort of loose sands and muds and things. If you look on the image on the left, it's actually really established salt marsh, sand dunes. There are creeks running through that bit of land. It's a really serious chunk of land that's been washed away, part of an issue with longshore drift that they're having there. And what that does, and what it's doing, is it's revealing and eroding archaeology. So the black dots that you can see on both slides, they're a plan of a site. I have a picture of that here. This is what's been revealed in those 15 years as that land has been moving and been washed away. It's a huge site. It spans sort of 30 to 40 metres in width, about 60 metres in length. It's a grand old structure that's related to a scheduled monument about 100 metres further west of it. But some of these piles that you can see here, they protrude from the foreshore between 50 and 60 centimetres. So if we're thinking about the amount of depth that's been lost, we can use the archaeology to understand that. This wasn't visible in 2015. In that short period of time, relatively short period of time, it's a period of time that we can all identify with. It's not an abstract amount of time for this change to take place. This structure and this archaeology has been revealed. So that's kind of the problem that we face all around the UK. And how are we responding to that? Well, Citizen has 6 different discovery programme areas, we call them, and they're dotted all around the coast of the country. And we try to incorporate different types of coastline, rocky, cliffy, chalky coastlines down in the southeast coast, the estuarine environments of the Thames and the Solent, more riverine environments in South Devon, that kind of thing. So we have projects up in Liverpool Bay and Humberside, Mersey Island, as I've said, and East Kent, Solent Harbours and the South Devon Rivers. And we're a 3-year project. We're actually in the second phase of our project. We had an initial 3 years where we were nationwide, and we were looking at trying to incorporate a new smartphone app, trying to develop that to the point where the public can actually send us information about archaeology, and we can try to identify hotspots that we should zone in on. And that's really a result of what you see here. That's our second phase. So we're halfway through that second phase. We're a year and a half in, and we've been kindly funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund and the host of other sponsors and partners that you see across the bottom of the screen there. So we're really touching on an agenda that's quite key to a lot of the major heritage organisations in England. Of course, as I've said, and I will say lots more, we're very much community-based, and we're both app-based, smartphone app, and fieldwork. So the types of technology, I guess, the types of rapid recording that we do, because of course we only have a limited tidal window to capture this stuff. And as we're not an excavation project, we need to capture as much detail as possible. So we're quite tech heavy. We make an awful lot of use of drones, as you can see in the top left, and the resulting aerial survey on the right hand side. We make a lot of use of RTK kits, high precision GPS equipment, basically, to run out and make surveys as quick as we can. Some of the sites that I work on and with the community are actually only accessible at the lowest of tides and are up to 2 kilometers offshore. So being able to get out there and have between 20 and 30 minutes to conduct some work it means that we need the right kit to do that, and these ones are the right pieces. And in the center of the screen, you see our application that's publicly available. And the information that we gather using that app, which is very simple and we've just revamped and we're about to relaunch, is straightforward. We just ask members of the public to give a name to a feature that they've recently identified or they've located, take some pictures of it, 4 pictures. We automatically get a GPS location from the phone, and then we ask for a description of what it is that they're looking at, what it is they can see. And we've been collating that data for the last sort of 3 to 4 years, and we have a publicly accessible and searchable database now on our website. And this is a screen grab from our new iteration of our map, our coastal map. And we've added, to make this data more relevant to the themes of the project, thinking about sea level change throughout history, we've added these new filters, which you can see at the bottom. So monument types, different sorts of things you'd find on the coast, fish weirs, fish processing sites, I suppose, Coast Guard stations, military defence sites, all that kind of thing, the places that we work. And you can search by those, you can search by the archaeological period or the historical period that we're concerned with, and you can now search for the height of these sites or these features above or below sea level. So once we get datable evidence and we can securely pin our sites in, we can now add in these heights, these levels, which means that we could, for example, look at all the Roman or all the medieval, fish traps between ½ meter and -½ meter, and the map will return all those results. So the work that the public are doing are really being able to help us build a picture of the coastline in that way. So that's kind of the tech and the method, really, but the thing that sits at the heart, the very heart of the project, are the people, the communities that we work in. Where in the first period of the project we were quite spread out, rushing all over the coast of England trying to get people using this app, we've now honed in and we're working very specifically with certain groups, certain villages, certain townships all around the coast that are able to help us. And it's them who really lead us to the sites, to the archaeology that we look at. They are the eyes on the ground, and they know that location, they know that area better than anyone else. So it's no good us jumping in from London and saying, right, off we go, let's go and have a look at XYZ. That's not really the way that this has worked for us. It's really been to go and sit down with these people and let them tell us what it is that they think we should be looking at. Because there are an awful lot of experts in various different skills, various different professions that live in these communities. And the only way that we ever get to know about them is to put on little events, little talks, try and generate some interest and try and get these people on board. And I've been very fortunate in Mersey Island to meet some of the people that you can see on this slide here, particularly the expert in coastal and estuarine morphology. He's been very handy, as I'm sure you can imagine. But we have drone pilots, we have people who work on the local oyster board, so that puts us in touch with all of the oystermen who are out every single day scouring the foreshore. We have archivists, parish councillors, and a musician and sound recordist, as you can see, which I'll come back to later, which is one of the other ways that we've had people get involved in the project. So these are the people, that's how the project works. It's about people and rapid recording technologies. So now I'm going to look in a little bit more detail at one case study, which is my project, Mersey Island. It sits in Essex, so just to locate you here, obviously London on the left end there. We're kind of a little further out on the Upper Thames estuary, just coming round towards Colchester. Here we are again, a little bit closer. The little spiky river running to the north there, that is the River Colne, which terminates around and about Colchester. And off to the west, there to the left, is the Blackwater estuary that runs to Malden, famous for its sea salt and famous for its historical sea salt making remains, actually, which we've been coming into contact with a lot more recently. But this gives you an idea of where we are. And you can see the black heavy line is the high water line, and the slightly fainter, the grey line, is the low water line. And you can see on Mersey Island, which is the blob that sits between those two rivers, that when the water goes out, it goes quite a long way out. So there's an awful large expanse of mud that we have to cover, and we get our volunteers to help us cover. But why has the project kind of resonated? Why has this interest in intertidal archaeology really taken hold on Mersey? Well, I think it's because it already has quite a strong identity that we've been able to position and align ourselves in, and that's rung a bell with a lot of people on the island. It has about 6,000 people live there. You can see on this picture that they live to the kind of western end of the island. That's where the main settlement is. There are a few scattered farmsteads and a little village out towards the east, but everyone kind of lives in this one spot, and there's a lot of industries there, a lot of typical coastal industries. You can see all the boats, there's lots of sailing, there's lots of fishing, there's lots of oysters, famous for their oysters, that kind of thing. So we have this really, really strong already existing community identity that has, for the most part, been exposed to the foreshore every single day. Most of the people who live on the island visit the beach, they're walking their dog, they're just going for a walk, they're doing whatever. But they're always down there, and they're always watching, they're always aware and conscious of change, particularly in the landscape, but also in what it's revealing, what the sea is revealing to them. We'll look at some of the archaeology that they find, but it's kind of key to just to bear in mind that these folks are very perceptive, and they've kind of really driven how we've improved the model of the project, because it's really about how they see the landscape rather than us coming in and telling them how they perhaps should perceive it. So I have a video. Let's see if this works. Great, it does. This just gives you a bit of a flavour of what we have to work with, what we're looking at. This is flying northwards from the very tip of a spit. You can see two of our volunteers perfectly in there for scale. Just giving you a sense of how massive this mud flare is. It's about, or at least 8 square kilometres worth of mud. But what you can see here, there's darker patches that we're starting to fly over now. This is an exposed peat shelf on which we find a lot of remains of submerged woodland. So tree stumps, tree trunks, root bowls, that kind of thing. They all seem to be aligning on what appears to be a relict bay. It looks like the edge of some sort of former watercourse. And it's within this area as well that we've been finding a lot of prehistoric remains, Bronze Age remains in particular. And closer to the island we've been finding later remains, Iron Age remains, human remains, that kind of thing. And you can see just how large the problem is, or the challenge I suppose is. So when we go out and we look at these places, we try to take groups of volunteers of up to about 20 folks, and we effectively field walk this landscape. The drone footage that you're seeing is from one of our volunteers, Jim, who actually goes out in advance and suggests some places that might be of interest, but still you can see it's a sizable issue even when we do get out there. You can see here again the peat shelf, the edge of that watercourse being picked up again, and this is really rich again with lots of debris from the submerged forest, the seemingly collapsed submerged forest that if we look just around the edge of this tip here, we're going to fly over it. We've got a lot of tree stumps here, all pointing in the same way, all looking like they've been felled at some point naturally by some sort of weather event. And that's the kind of type of thing that we're looking for when we're out and about on site. The spit as well, further in front of you, that contains a host of Iron Age remains, lots of structures, circular features, that kind of thing. But that gives you a good idea of what, where and how big. Now for a little bit more detail. So these are the things that our volunteers find. These are the things that we get phone calls about, we get images about, we get very excited phone calls about. It's actually really quite fine and very well preserved archaeology. We have appears to be elements of trackways that have been set across the foreshore. You can see it's as I say, really well preserved. Fortunately, waterlogged remains often are wooden waterlogged remains, but it's the sheer scale of the remains that we're encountering that's of particular significance on Mersey Island. You You can see here, this is our project leader, Gustav Milne, pioneer of foreshore archaeology on the Thames estuary. He's leading our project, and he's always often keen to visit, simply because he gets to play with things like this. This is Mark Dixon as well, one of our key volunteers in the background there. But you can see this is popping out here, there and everywhere, all over the mudflats of Mersey. Now this is, I guess, our jewel in the crown so far. This was something discovered by two oystermen, Daniel and Daniel French, father and son, and they found this about 1.5 kilometres offshore, fully covered with mud. They gave the end of it a clean, sent us a picture, and we came out with Historic England because we thought, oh, this looks a little bit more important than all the rest of the things we've been finding. It turns out it's part of a Bronze Age trackway. It's actually exquisitely well preserved and unique for the area. These are 3 gigantic oak planked pieces of wood that were found in situ, sitting on a bed of brushwood, crossing what appears to be a former sort of marshy area out there. And these are 3 of our volunteers that, again, helped to move these timbers. We were against the tide, so they had their boat in with us, and they were able to sail very, very happily, sail off around the island with these remains. And then we were able to follow up with the community as well and get these people in and give them some lessons, give them a day in our HQ in London, helping them, experts, to clean these timbers and examine the timbers, draw them, that kind of thing. And these are the sorts of things that we found. Look at these beautiful tool marks that were still very present on the sockets that were cut in the ends of these timbers to drive some stakes through to pin these to the ground. Perfect size, perfectly recognisable axe marks on there. Unfortunately, we were able to date this material. And so the late Bronze Age, this 68, I think, if anyone's quick enough to count those, 68-year-old oak tree. It was from 952 BC. So what's really important about when we get this datable material is that we're able to pin a level, a height above sea level that was accessible during that period of time. And that allows us to redraw this map of Mersey Island. So these are the things that we find when we're out in the field walk on our big official days. What have the public been doing when we've not been there? Well, they've been adding all of these dots to the map. I mentioned our app. This is the result of that. These green dots that you can see all over the screen are new ones that have been added by the public. The larger dots are clusters, so there's lots more information underneath those. But in general, they've added over 70 new features in the space of about 2 years on the island, just investigating this mudflat. So it's really struck a chord with these folks. We actually managed to get a quite detailed picture of the past former coastlines around the island. It's a slightly more defined picture, a little bit more detail on here, but this gives you a flavour again of where all of our Bronze Age material is on the island. We've been able to push that coastline out by about 1,800 metres through our discoveries so far. And that's allowed us to start thinking about other parts of the estuary, other parts of the Colne and the Blackwater, and some of the remains that we've been finding on there, because at this point it's really just been discrete features, nothing bigger than a few sort of square metres, but just lots of them everywhere, lots of stakes, wattle, hurdles, that kind of stuff. So only in the last week have we really been able to dig in and start finding these much, much larger sites. You'll have to believe me, you won't be able to count the ones on the left, but there are over 300 piles in this ginormous structure. It's about 180 metres long. This is brand new. This has been washed out in the last sort of 10 years. Again, found by one of our volunteers. The image on the right, the plan on the right, that's another huge circular feature with lots of supporting timbers, wattle structures all around it. Again, this is all on the foreshore, all revealed in the last 10 years, and all recognised by local people who know this landscape and who've walked it. So these are the things that we're fortunate enough to be working with people. But it's not just conducting these surveys. The skills that we have from the people that we work with, they've really started to drive new ways of considering how to approach accessing and recording this archaeology, how to target our work in these huge expanses of estuary, which are typical all around the UK. but they're not easy to access and certainly not easy to cover in one tide. So what they've been doing, all of this is off their own back. This is just their enthusiasm for the project. They've started looking at the aerial survey data that we have. So this was captured by one of our volunteers. It's a false colour, it's a terrain model. So it's a height of the land surface. The lighter the colour, the higher the land. The dotted features are all the different archaeological features that we. And then they started comparing this data to LiDAR data that we're able to get from the Environment Agency, and started making actual detailed computational model difference. And this is what they came up with. The blue areas, again, are the highest parts of the land surface, or the higher ground, flashing out into the yellows and the reds. That's the sea, effectively. The tide was coming in. But what they've been able to identify is in the yellow areas, that is where our archaeology is coming out. And we know that we've dated some of that material to the Bronze Age. So we can actually start to predict, using these maps, these models of foreshore loss, sediment loss, to target our surveys in the future and know where to send our volunteers to try and investigate and find out if any more remains are coming out. So we're starting to get human remains that are coming out in these yellow areas, and we're starting to get more features. So we're kind of refining a model that appears to work for the challenge that we face. Again, this is all down to volunteers in our community. So all of this work has been a lot of fun for them. It's been a very interesting learning experience. It's been something some of them have never ever done before. But has it had any effect on the way that they view themselves or their island or their history? And I think it really has. It's really captured their imaginations. This wonderful map has been hand drawn by one of our volunteers' daughters, and it's an idea of what the coast might look like in the Bronze Age. But we get quite a lot of this material sort of sent to us. A lot of people thinking, a lot of people trying to guess or estimate whereabout these coastlines might have been. And it's really kind of brought about a sense of a renewed sense of looking at their island history, I guess. Mersey Islanders have always considered themselves to be separate from the mainland and to be quite special in that regard. But I think what the evidence is starting to show is that the island has, perhaps for the most part of its history, been connected to the mainland, and that's actually started to open up some interesting debates on the island. When we give talks, we present this work, we have a really quite fantastic following, a quite fantastic reach on the island. There are 6,000 people, and over the past 3 years we've had over 600 of them visit our events, our evening lectures, our evening seminars, that kind of thing, and we average about 160 to these talks. So it's really getting people talking on the island, and there's a lot of involvement on the back of that. We have a core group of volunteers of about 10 or 11 people, but we also have a much wider network of folks, around 60 or 70 people on the island, who occasionally get in touch, who occasionally send information, but are all very aware of what we're doing at all the time. There's been a great transfer of skills in the environment, in the community. People have been able to teach each other how to use free mapping software, how to photograph archaeology, how to even just access the foreshore. For some people, going out onto these mudflats has been a real first experience, even though they've lived there all their lives. Going over a kilometre offshore is a difficult thing, and it takes new friendships and a new social group to really give people the power and the confidence to get out there and have a look at this. And that's been really one of the really positive upshots of this for me. There's this new appreciation of this lost landscape and what it might throw up. And of course, the new archaeological knowledge. People really feel like they're contributing to improvements in our understanding of the former coastlines of the UK. The chap on the bottom right, I should add, is Daniel French Jr. He's the chap who found the Bronze Age trackway. He's quite an interesting character. He gets in touch with me around about once or twice a year and says, "Oh, I found something, Oliver, I found something." And every time he's contacted me, it's been something incredible. He's 19 years old and he's taken a fascination in archaeology and a subject that he would never really have been exposed to. He has been picking oysters since he was 14 with his dad. So we've had some really lovely positive impacts such as that. So what are the other ways the community can get involved if they can't make it out onto the foreshore with us? Since we've had lockdown, we haven't been able to go out and do any work with the public, which has been a real shame, because we keep getting these calls saying, "Oh, you've got to come and have a look, you've got to come and have a look." We can't. So we're trying to think of other ways that we can keep people's minds ticking over and keep them making a contribution in the meantime. And one of those is a small project partly funded by the National Environment Research Council to try and understand environmental change using archaeology as a proxy again in two portions of the island. Here we've got the West End, a place called the Monkey Beach, and this map shows the different high and low water lines in 1923 and 2019, so around about 100 years. And the fainter lines are the older lines, and we can see just how much has been lost over that 100 years. In some cases, about 100 metres of the coast has receded. I think the scale is underneath my head, so I'm sorry about that. But we want to populate this map with memories. What do people know about this place before we even go and visit it? What kind of picture can we build up of it? And it turns out that a lot of people collect postcards on Mersey Island. There's a wonderful little museum that kind of sits at the hub of a network of people who gather and archive all the different resources and personal records of people who've lived on the island all their life. And within these records are these fantastic postcards. The top and the bottom are two of the same places, and you can see around about the 1920s, top left, it's a place called Cudmore Grove, and then you can see about 3 weeks ago on the right. So we can already see that there's a huge amount of change taking place just from these archives of folks on the island who are talking about not only the archaeology and the history, but we can see the different types of flora and fauna, the salt marsh in particular that's disappeared. On the bottom left, we have the Monkey Beach. We have the beautiful wall and the seawall, and that hard for landing boats. That is the image on the right. That's the scene now. All of that is gone, and only remnants of it are being revealed. So before we even get out there, we can really build a strong picture of what it might have looked like and what we might expect to find. But we can also record people's memories. I mentioned our sound. Our musician and sound recording specialist earlier on. His name is Lawrence. He now actually works for the project, having volunteered with us for a number of years, and he has produced the most fantastic little sub-project called Searching Mersey, in which he's gone and conducted oral histories with lots of island residents and produced this wonderful map, which you can see here. Each one of these little pins is a story, and if you visit the website, you can click on that and you can listen to that memory. They're between a minute and 3 minute long. They're not huge, but they're really, really packed full of information, things that were seen in their childhood, great timber piles, baskets, all kinds of things, Roman pottery. It's incredible the level of detail that we've been able to conduct just by talking to people, which sounds straightforward, but when you map those conversations, when you map those memories, it becomes really quite a powerful tool, and it's a great way to engage a community. It's a really great intergenerational tool that we've been using. So some of the feedback then of the effects of working on intertidal sites can have on these wonderful coastal communities. I'm not going to read them all out to you, but they've really come out and they've been quite, I guess, generous in their comments. There's a lot of people who have had an awfully good time, an awfully educational time, and felt like they've contributed to a much wider picture. And I really put that down to the model that Citizen has developed, and that was developed on the back of the work in Scotland with Tom Dawson and the Shark Project, and the Thames Discovery Programme as well. All of these intertidal archaeology projects have had their own little niche in their own little way, and they kind of managed to pull off something really quite great with Citizen, which I'm really happy about. And just to finish for you, just some numbers, just to give you a flavour of the contributions beyond the archaeology that the community have made. We have a new permanent museum exhibit that's going to be displaying all of those fantastic Bronze Age timbers that will be turning up on the island soon. Historic England have very kindly conserved those, and we'll be displaying them and opening that brand new exhibit as soon as the museum can open again. And £6,000 from the local community was donated to that project, which is amazing, really. We've had 78 volunteers, lots and lots of aerial surveys conducted in kind. All of these incredibly useful things have been so forthcoming from the community simply by listening to them and by understanding what it is that they find interesting about the archaeology that they can see. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope it was interesting for you to learn a little bit more about Mersey. It's a shame that we can't have any live questions, but I've popped my email address on there if you'd like to get in touch and talk about any of the archaeology that we found or the model that we've been using, how we've been working with the communities. Please do drop me an email and I'll be happy to get in touch with you. Otherwise, you can visit our website and check out our new searchable map and see all of the different archaeology that we've been finding on Mersey and around the English coast. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and thank you very much for watching.